Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to our program on Kardec Radio.
Welcome to the Messengers in Our Home. Dear Kardec Radio listeners, welcome back to the Messengers in Our Home. Tonight we're going to talk about Chapter 45, A Sickly Mind. Hello Mackenzie.
Hi Francisca. Hello everyone. Welcome back to another chapter of the Messengers in Our Home.
And as usual, before we start, let's elevate our thoughts to the higher spheres. Taking a moment to stop and reconnect to God, our Creator. Praising His love and His justice, His presence in our lives, whether we feel it or not. Praising the greatness of creation, the perfection of the laws that guide the universe and therefore our lives. We thank you, dear Mother, Father God, for all the blessings we receive every single day. Your guidance, your love, the many ways you find to support us and to help us in our struggles. We thank you for this opportunity of being gathered once more in your name, making these teachings accessible to everyone, no matter where we are in the world. Being united with our brothers and sisters of the universal family in many different places, and feeling this connection through the medium of the internet and Kardec Radio. We thank the good spirits, their constant love and support as well, inspiring us, motivating us to stay on the path towards you, to get to know ourselves better, to improve ourselves, and to become more loving towards God, towards us and our neighbors in each moment. And with your permission, we now would like to start our meeting, and so be it. Now let's listen to the reading of Chapter 45. Enjoy.
Chapter 45, A Sickly Mind. As he continued watching and working, Aniceto remarked, "Not only ill discarnates come here. Notice the incarnate ones as well. Between our circle and the group of incarnates, the percentage of workers in relation to the number of the sick and needy is about the same." Nodding toward a well-dressed and elegant gentleman who was conversing with Mr. Bentes, the instructor for that group, he added, "Look at that friend, surrounded in darkness, conversing with our sister Isabel's co-worker. Listen to what he's saying, and then judge for yourselves." Indeed, the gentleman was surrounded by small clouds, mainly around his head. I focused my attention on him, and could hear him distinctly. "For a long time," he affirmed emphatically, "I have been going to spiritist meetings looking for something that might satisfy me. However," and he smiled ironically, "either I am unhappier than others, or we are dealing with a worldwide deception. Noticing his incarnate guide's respectful attitude, he continued proudly, I have studied a great deal and cannot disregard the sieve of strict reason. I have read a lot of books about human survival after death, but I have never obtained any proof of it. Spiritism is full of alluring theses, but the subject still raises many questions. Kardec's work undeniably shows extraordinary philosophical insight, but we also find a great many new perspectives in Richer. Metaphysics has corrected many flights of imagination and has offered for public analysis more profound observations about the unknown powers of the human species. In examining these scientific truths, the dimensions of mediumship have been reduced. We need a movement of rationalization, adjusting the phenomena to appropriate criteria. Nevertheless, my dear Bentis, we live in an arena of subtle mystification that is far removed from precise demonstration. Very calm and secure in his faith, Bentis interrupted. Well, Dr. Fidelis, I will agree that Spiritism should not try to avoid honest speculation. However, I believe that the doctrine is a collection of sublime truths, which are directed primarily to the human heart. It is impossible to examine their divine grandeur with our imperfect faculties of observation, or to gather their pure waters with the soiled vessel of our mind, which has been contaminated by the errors of many millennia. Furthermore, we have learned that the revelation of divine order is not the mechanical workings of the law of least effort. Let's remember that the Master's gospel mission was preceded by many centuries of human effort. Before Christians died in the Roman arenas of martyrdom, how many of Jesus' precursors were sacrificed? First, we must build the receptacle. Then we will receive the blessing. The Bible, the sacred book of Christians, is an encounter with human experience filled with sweat and tears, intimately portrayed in the Old Testament, with the heavenly, sublime, and pure response in the gospel of our Lord. Dr. Fidelis smiled vaguely, revealing something halfway between irony and offended vanity. Bentis, however, didn't miss the opportunity and continued, If all the serious work of human life is something sacred in our sight, then what about the expression of the divine in planetary work? In regarding the essentiality of labor in organizing the world, what would become of us if a handful of spirit friends and scholars suddenly transported us to a broad vision of more highly evolved orbs, taking us to them simply because of their holy esteem for us as individuals? Would we be prepared for the radical change? Would we know what life on a higher orb would be like? Will we have worked enough to understand the divine designs? And what about the earth? And our millenary debt to the planet that has borne our imperfections? How can we dwell in the higher realms without draining the swamps that lie below? These considerations become crucial for examining an argument such as yours, because we cannot accurately judge the abundant currents of a voluminous river if we see only the drops collected in the thimble of our limitations. The obstinate scholar looked even more ironic and retorted, You speak as a man of faith, whereas my efforts are directed toward reason and science. I wish to refer to the inevitable inferences of free research, to the mediumistic frauds down through time. You are aware that many scientists have examined the frauds involving mediumship in Europe and America. Well, what can you expect of a doctrine entrusted to continental deceivers? Bentis replied, very serenely and thoughtfully, You are mistaken, my friend. We would be committing a grave error if we placed all doctrinal responsibility on mediums. Mediums are simple co-workers in the work of spiritualization. They will all have to answer for what they have done with their abilities, just as we ourselves will be compelled to settle our accounts someday. We must not commit the absurdity of attributing the concentration of all divine truths to the minds of only certain individuals who are candidates for new sects of worship. The Spiritist doctrine, Dr. Fidelis, is a sublime and pure fountain, inaccessible to the individualistic cravings of any one of us, a fountain from which all individuals must drink the water of their own renewal. As for mediumistic frauds, you must realize that so-called scientific infallibility has sought to convert the noblest mediums into nervous wrecks or into simple laboratory guinea pigs. Researchers currently labeled metaphysics are strange tillers who plow the fields of service without producing anything fundamentally useful. They bend over the ground, count the grains of sand and invasive worms, determine the degree of heat, and study the longitude. They observe climatic tendencies and note atmospheric variations, but to the great surprise of sincere workers, they disregard the seed. Dr. Fidelis stopped smiling and commented, "We shall see, we shall see. I am waiting for a message from my loved ones to provide me with an unmistakable sign of survival after death." Aniceto touched us lightly and said, "Have you noticed how this man displays a contaminated mind? He is one of those curious ill incarnates. He has a broad education, but nevertheless, since his sentiments have been poisoned, everything that comes into his mind partakes of this general toxicity. He is a superficial researcher, as are many people. He expects everything from others. He examines his fellows, but doesn't examine himself. He wants divine realization without making a human effort. He expects grace for himself, yet makes demands on others. He wants to reap the wheat of truth without participating in the sowing. He hopes for peace of mind through faith without taking part in constructive work. He values science without consulting his conscience. He prefers ease without accepting responsibility and living in the whirlwind of continual social drinking, clinging to lower interests and the utmost satisfaction of the physical senses. He expects to receive messages from spirits." We were amazed by these interesting conclusions. Vicente was again deeply impressed and asked, "What does this man want after all?" Aniceto smiled and replied, "He himself would find that very difficult to answer. For us, Vicente, Dr. Fidelis is one of those sickly persons who have not yet decided to look for relief because of their excessive attachment to the physical senses." Tonight we're talking about chapter 45, A Sickly Mind. Well, you have just heard the reading of the chapter, so you know that we keep on going with the meeting that's happening at Dona Isabel's house. But differently than last chapter, when we saw that Andre was applying passes to some of the discarnate spirits, and we talked a little about how he is able to help, how he is able not to help, but it's not about himself only, it's also about how the spirits receive that help, Are they ready to receive it? Are they ready to really take, how can I say this, take the full amount of energies for them to get better? Maybe because they are not ready for it, maybe because they don't want it enough. So we saw that it depends on us. It depends on how we are, what we are really seeking. Do we really have our minds set to it? And Aniceto told us that, well, unfortunately, not all of us will be able to gather what it is that we need at that specific moment. However, if we are on the side of helping, or in our last week's chapter, if we are on the side of applying the passes, of giving advice, of talking to people, we should not be focused on results, but we should focus on what is coming out of us towards the others that we are trying to help, that we are really striving to become closer and to become more loving towards them. And that's more or less what we talked about last week. But now we have to move on, right? And on this chapter, which is entitled The Sickly Mind, we will meet two people. At this time, we will meet two incarnate people, right? One is Mr. Bentes, which is a co-worker of Dona Isabel at that work that happens at that specific place in that specific time. But by the way, it's been a while since the last time I focused for a little bit on the names of the characters. In this chapter, we have two characters, and we already know their names. One is Mr. Bentes, and the other one is Dr. Fidelis. So Bentes in Portuguese is, I wouldn't say it's an abbreviation, but it's like a nickname, or it means the same as Benedict. So, and Benedict means blessed. So it is interesting, once again, that the name refers to a person and is it shows us more or less what that person is, and one characteristic of that specific person. And what Mr. Bentes is doing here, he is getting the teaching, and he is applying the teaching in a blessed way towards Dr. Fidelis, who will ask a few interesting questions, and we're going to discuss a little bit when we're going over them. And the other one is Dr. Fidelis, which maybe you know, maybe you don't know, but Fidelis comes from faith or faithful, and means a faithful person, which is very interesting because, as you all know, and we heard the reading of the chapter already, so he is not faithful in the sense of having a religious faith, but as you could probably gather by now, he is faithful to his thoughts, but not faithful in a sense of constructive faith, of, I would say, religious faith, but he is more, in a way, faithful to himself and to his unfortunate sickly mind, as the title of the chapter shows us. But let's start. I already gave a few hints of what we're going to discuss, but let's start. So they continue working. Aniceto is there working together with Vicente, with Andre, and then he says that not only discarnate ill people, ill spirits come there. Naturally, it's not just for the discarnates. The discarnate part of the attendance will be helped because the environment, the spiritual environment of that session is helpful to anyone, discarnate or incarnate, that approaches that specific place. And naturally, it also has a specific audience. as we discussed, I'm not sure if it was last chapter. It might have been 2 chapters ago. That just to make an analogy here, for example, if you have in ER, right, in the emergency room, you can get a lot of different people with a lot of different problems. Why? Because it's an ER. But if it's not an ER, if it's, let's say, an orthopedic clinic, right? If you have a stomach problem, you will not go there. Why? Because the doctors, the nurses that are there will not be able to help you. Here's the same thing. This specific place for this house, Donna Isabel's house, is not appropriately designed for different types of treatments. And we talked a little about this. So this group here works with people that already believe or already have their mind set that they want to be helped. It's not for those spirits who are really, really, really sick, on an ER problem, that just, for example, had a traumatic experience and want to scream and want to, let's say, disturb the environment. No, this is not the right place. Donna Isabel's house is not the right place to treat those kinds of spirits. So they would be taken to a different place. And naturally, the incarnate ones can come and will come to that meeting and will be helped accordingly to what they need at that specific moment. And that's what Aniceto is discussing with Andre and showing Andre and Vicente there. And he points to Mr. Bentes. And I'd just like to mention, if you're following us, as we remind you from time to time, if you're following us with the book in your hands, with the English book in your hands, the version that I have here, when Aniceto invites us and invites Andre to pay attention to what Mr. Bentes is saying, the reading of the chapter says, and if you listen to the opening, to the reading of the chapter, there's we already changed this word in the reading because it's we're talking about the incarnate spirits. Mr. Bentes is a friend of Sister of Isabel, right? But in the reading that I have here, in the version that I have, I don't know why, but they put husband. So I'm going to read as it is here in the book, and I'll explain it better. Look at that friend surrounded in darkness, conversing with our Sister Isabel's husband. Listen to what he's saying and then judge for yourselves. So it is as if Aniceto is saying that Mr. Bentes, or that friend that's surrounded in darkness, is talking to Sister Isabel's husband. But that's not the case. This friend is an incarnate one, and he's not talking to Sister Isabel's husband. We know that Sister Isabel's husband is discarnate, right? He's probably there at the meeting, but he's not physically, materially speaking, there. So this friend, which we know is Dr. Fidelis, could not be talking to Sister Isabel's husband. So this word husband here, I don't know why they put it here, but it should be, is Sister Isabel's friend or Sister Isabel's co-worker. I prefer the word co-worker because he works, Mr. Bentes works there with Sister Isabel at her house. So it's one of her co-workers in that work of love that they do. So it's just a note for you to mark there, and hopefully in the later editions they will change that word. So Andre pays attention to what's going on, and then he says that gentleman was surrounded by small clowns, mainly around his head. It is interesting, those images, right? It is. We even see these images in cartoons, right? When a person is sick or is angry, in old cartoons, we would see those clouds, dark clouds surrounding the mind, as if it's in even the expressions sometimes say that, right? Oh, I'm clouded. My judgment is clouded. So it is as if I'm surrounded by those clouds, so dark clouds, and I cannot see correctly. And that's the image that Andre wants to convey here. That mind has something that the mind in itself, right? The person created these clouds, and it just doesn't allow for the mind to clearly see. It is as if there's a veil, right? There's a thick veil that doesn't allow that person to see further, and it limits the circle of understanding. And then Andres says that he focused his attention on him, and probably Vicente as well. Naturally, Andre is the narrator here, but Vicente at the end will ask a question showing that he was there at the same time, paying attention to what is going on. And then Dr. Fidelis starts to describe what's going on. We don't know his name yet. I'm saying just because we already read the chapter. So he says that he's been going to Spiritist meetings, and this will speak to us directly. I mean, to us who go to Spiritist meetings, who go to Spiritist Center or Spiritist Fraternity, whatever the name we want to call it. And he's been going there, but he doesn't find something there that satisfies him, and he says, or either I am unhappier, or I'm just looking at this and say, hey, who is trying to deceive me? What is going on here? But he goes on, and he says, well, I've studied a lot, I read a lot, so I know a lot of stuff. I've been reading. And he even mentions this name, which is Richer. It's a French name, right? Who is Richer that he mentions here, and I'm going to read it from Wikipedia, which has a very, very brief description of him, which is very accurate, and I'm going to read it, just a small paragraph. And Wikipedia says his full name was Charles Robert Richer. He was born in 1850 and died in 1935. He was a French physiologist who initially investigated a variety of subjects such as neurochemistry, digestion, thermoregulation in homeothermic animals, and breathing. He won the Nobel Prize in recognition of his work on anaphylaxis in 1913. He also presided over the French Eugenics Society from 1920 to 1926. Richer devoted many years to the study of paranormal and spiritualist phenomena, coining the term ectoplasm. So he is studying Spiritism because he created what science calls metaphysics, which is to the start of studying the relationship, or what's beyond what physics can study. So it's this relationship with the untouchable, with the other world. And then that's what Dr. Fidelis is talking about. So he is this researcher, right? He is this doctor. So he has a lot in his mind. His intelligence is great. And that's what he's telling us here, that Richer and metaphysics have already showed a lot of these things that we see in Allan Kardec's work, and even Dr. Fidelis even mentions Kardec's work when he says that Kardec's work undeniably shows extraordinary philosophical insight. And then he compares Kardec's work to Charles Richer that we just mentioned. But he says while talking that because of this research that metaphysics is doing, it shows that mediumship is reduced from what maybe at the time they believed mediumship was to what they believe it is right now, saying more or less that, we can explain a lot of these things without needing the explanation of mediumship. That's basically what he is trying to tell us here, right, with his explanation. And he says at the end that we live in an arena of subtle mystification that is far removed from precise demonstration. So he doesn't want to really understand what's behind it. He wants a precise demonstration, as if he wants a really and totally scientifically 100% to the greatest degree of precision what mediumship can do. And it's interesting that we forget sometimes that, for example, psychology is not a precise science, right? It's a science that deals with statistics and deals with the differences between two people, among a lot of people, which we have probably a statistic that works this way, but every person is its own individual and have their own desires, their own wishes, and that cannot have a precise definition, right? So maybe that's what he wants, and he brings this to mediumship, but we can take this to other things that maybe at the time were not even considered science, because it deals with the mind, with something that's so abstract that science has a difficult time understanding it. There is still this debate or these questions among, let's say, mathematics, physics, chemistry, these types of sciences, and they sometimes, or some people sometimes look at philosophy or look sometimes at psychology, and they say, well, this is not science. So we could probably say the same with the mediumistic studies, right? It's, even if some people don't think it is, or can be studied as science, although it doesn't necessarily all the time give us the same results by what we expect. However, we forget that when we are dealing with humans, responses can be different depending on the background, depending on a lot of different things. So, but that's his point. I'm just digressing a little bit. So, thinking on and about what he is saying here to put together with what Mr. Bentis will tell us, because he will respond to what Dr. Fidelis is asking him or asserting here. And that's how he starts, and which is very, very important for all of us, because we need to remember that Spiritism does not have the answer for everything. No, that's why we have all those different sciences. That's why we have a lot of different religious expressions in the world, so that we together can go further and further down to find the whole truth. And when I mean the whole truth, I mean the whole knowledge, the entire knowledge of the universe. No, it's not in in the belief that I hold that I will find the truth for everything. If I need to find a problem in my house, I'm having an issue at the wall of my house, or I'm having an issue with the saucepan that my wife uses to cook. If I have an issue with the car that somebody drives, it's not Spiritism who will solve these problems. If I have a problem in my mind, Spiritism can help, but we can go to a doctor, that psychologist, psychiatrist, and then they will help me figure out what's going on. So it's one part of the whole truth. And that's how Mr. Bentis starts. He says, Spiritism, and I agree that Spiritism should not try to avoid honest speculation. And that's how he starts. Probably he knows, Mr. Bentis knows Dr. Fidelis, and maybe he knows that Dr. Fidelis asks a lot of questions, which is not wrong, which is completely fine, and we should encourage the asking of questions. However, it needs to be an honest
question. It cannot be a mask over what you really want to do. It really needs to be an honest interest of seeking the truth, and not just for something that you don't even know that what you're looking at, right? It's being like a false statement over, or a mask, right, of a question, of a speculation, just to show that the other one is wrong. No, you need to be honest in speculate, in really, and by this word speculation here, it means looking for, right? It means going further in asking questions, wholeheartedly asking questions, but honest, in an honest way. Otherwise, it will just be to destroy other people's faiths. And why would we want to do that if that faith is bringing consolation, is bringing happiness, is bringing work, service, is making the world a better place? Why destroy that, right? So if you're being dishonest, if we are being dishonest in really asking questions, then you should be asking questions to yourself, right? We should be asking questions to ourselves. And if you really paid attention to the reading into this chapter, you know that this beginning here, it will be exactly how, and then it will circle around to the end of the chapter. It needs to be the question that we need to ask ourselves. And Mr. Bente says that the Spiritist doctrine is it may look like it is to go for the reason, but what in Mr. Bente's vision here, he says that the collection of sublime truths that Spiritism is directed primarily to the human heart, primarily, because it is not what's the outside look like, but what those truths, what that knowledge can and allows us to re-examine ourselves, to look for this renewal that we all need to really be a better person, to really be happier. And they are sublime truths. How can, and then he will use some expressions for us to try to understand this. How can we examine pure water if we are a glass that's completely soiled, that's completely dirty? Once we put that water inside of us, it will get soiled, it will get dirty. So we really need to keep working and working and working so that we can clean ourselves to really understand these sublime, these divine truths. It is impossible, he says, to examine the divine grandeur of those truths with our imperfect faculties of observation. We are still way, way, way far away from really understanding these divine truths. Even though we are Spiritists, even though we want to learn, even though we are willing to learn, we are still far away from understanding what it is, those divine truths, what they really mean. We still have a long way to go. And imagine if we are all in, we understand and we are willing to learn, if we are honest in our search, and we embrace Spiritism. What he's saying here is even by being like that, it is impossible for us to examine and to really understand everything. Imagine if you're not being honest with yourself. Honest, having an honest question, having an honest speculation. It's even more dirty. It's even dirtier. Our vessel, our glass, ourselves, right? And then we need the pure waters to keep flowing so that we can get cleaned and cleaned and cleaned. But he goes on. He doesn't stop there. He says, our problem is and when I say our problem, I really mean our problem, is that we have like a law that guides our lives, and we don't even think about it, which is the law of least effort. And when I say we have a law, is not that it's a divine law; it's a human law, a law of the ones who are don't want to work or don't want to serve. It's the law of least effort, and we think that the world works like that, right? That everything I just got, let's say, I just got to the Spiritist Center, and I'm amazed by the teachings, and then all of a sudden on the other day I hope that everything has already changed, that all my problems have gone away, that just by going to that Spiritist meeting, just by reading a book, then everything all of a sudden magically turned into the no problem zone. And that's not how it is. For us to get to a point, we need to keep working, and that's what he says. He says, let's take the example of Jesus, right? The Master's gospel mission was preceded by many centuries of human effort. How many people died for us to get to the day when Jesus was here, right? So we need to build the receptacle. We need to build the glass. We need to build the pot, and then we will receive the blessing. Then we will receive something to put inside that receptacle that we just built. The Bible, for example, right, he says, is an example of this. We have the Old Testament, which is filled with sweat and tears. It's the human experience of sweat and tears. And then we have the New Testament with the heavenly, sublime, and pure response in the gospel of Jesus. So what is he trying to say here? He's trying to say that everything needs to be worked so that we can get to a point to really understand what we're doing. Nobody is born and knows, for example, how to write their own name. Do you remember how long did it take for you to write your own name? Maybe you have a recording of that. Maybe you have an old paper that your mom or your dad saved, and then you can see how beautiful your handwriting was when you were 2 years old, 3 years old. And then if we had all those recordings, if we had all these papers, we would see how it evolved. Well, some people, they had not evolved that much. Some people have terrible handwriting, right? And they had it back then. They still have it today. But we can understand. We know that they tried, and we know that they can read what they wrote. But if we look back to a person when that person was 2, and we try to read what that person was saying, of course we won't be able to read. Why? Because it took a lot of years for them to really understand what they were writing, to really understand what they were doing, so that we can have a common experience of understanding what we want to say to each other. It takes time for us to understand certain things. But even to do so, we need to honestly and seriously look forward to understanding that. Dr. Fidelis, after listening to some of this, was not, he says, Andres says that he was halfway between irony and offended vanity, but Mr. Bentis didn't stop. He just kept going. He says, hey, what would the world be, right? It just didn't appear from out of nowhere in 1 second. How much work, how much labor, how much time did it take to really build everything that it is out there? Right? Would we be able to see something just evolve like from 1 second to the other? What would happen? And what would happen to everything that we already have? With what we have to do right now, did we already work enough to understand what God wants from us? What would happen to us. There are movies about this, for example, of a person that didn't die, was in coma for 20, 30 years, and then wakes up, and all of a sudden, everything is changed. And the person is still the same. The person still has the same problems. The person still has the same mind that the person had, and everything has changed. And people that they knew were 2, now they're all of a sudden 22, and they don't know that person anymore because they didn't know it back then. They didn't know the experiences he lived, they lived, she lived, and what will happen with that missing time. So it's a gradual thing. We really need to go step by step, working hard to understand, to evolve, to progress, not all of a sudden, right? And he keeps going. He keeps giving us examples of that work, that service that we need to keep doing. And he finalizes his initial considerations here by asking about and putting it back to Dr. Fidelis, right? Say, what you're doing, what you're asking there, talking about Kardec, talking about Charles Richet, what you're saying there is that as if science already has all the knowledge in the universe and knows everything and can tell that Spiritism is completely wrong. But Mr. Bentis finalizes by saying that we cannot accurately judge the abundant currents of a voluminous river if we see only the drops collected in the thimble of our limitations. Can you imagine a small thimble that you put on your thumb to needle so that you don't prick yourself, you don't, hurt yourself with the needle? In a very, very big river, imagine that pond that you have close by, or imagine the ocean, right? Or imagine a big, big river like the Nile River, like the Amazon River, and then you see that there droplets of water are coming out of it. If you're close to it and it's running, the river is running, you're going to get a little bit wet. How can you imagine that you will judge the amount of water just by the small collection of drops that we can gather in a thimble of ourselves? This is the truth of the universe, right? We are collecting these small things to understand better, but we cannot judge the whole thing wrong just because I saw one small, very, very small piece. To which, naturally, the scholar, Dr. Fidelis, looked even more ironic and retorted. You speak as a man of faith. But I've seen a lot of mediumistic frauds, and I read a lot of research about mediums who were not mediums, who were being charlatans. And what can you tell me about this? How can you trust the doctrine or the whole teaching to these mediums who are deceivers? And Bente says, well, you are mistaken, my friend. And when I first read this, and I thought, well, this is not a good way of starting a conversation or the answer, but it is that sentence that it is said to really catch the attention of the reader. In our case, my attention was caught by that start when he says that, right? You are mistaken, my friend. But what is interesting is that he says you are mistaken, but then he includes himself on the next sentence by saying we would be. Right? So not only you, we, I, myself, I am included in this. We would be committing a grave error. Let's pay attention to this. A grave error if we placed all doctrinal responsibility on mediums. And in Spiritism, hopefully it's getting better, and I see it getting better, but we still hear stories from time to time about this, that we have this special medium, we have this special person that does this, and then we idolize that person because it's the only truth can come from that person, and so on and so forth. And what Mr. Bentes is telling us is what we already know, right? But like Jesus tells us, be careful with the false prophets. It's not that the person wants to be a false prophet. Just sometimes vanity can just takes hold of us. We're still imperfect spirits, and then all of a sudden, I can allow, without even noticing in the beginning, that I'm too proud of myself, that I'm let vanity take care of me and take hold of me, and all of a sudden I just stop reading, stop understanding, stop studying, and start believing all the spirits, start believing all the mediums, and all of a sudden I just walking away from the truth. So it is a grave error if we place all doctrinal responsibility on mediums. No. And then he says, mediums are simple co-workers in the work of spiritualization. They will all have to answer for what they have done with their abilities, just as we ourselves will be compelled to settle our accounts someday. So if your argument against Spiritism is because there were and still are mediums and people who are not the best people in the world, some of these mediums were charlatans or were not frauds in the beginning, but then all of a sudden they start to create and mystify things instead of really receiving messages, of really communicating with the ones who are on the other side, who are discarnated. Then we are putting our belief into an imperfect person. That's not what Spiritism is about. Spiritism is about understanding what's behind it, in the relationship between both worlds, not on the people who are being that bridge between the worlds. So if we do that, we will be creating a lot of different spiritisms around, because every one of us is different from the other. So there will be 7 billion different spiritisms or 7 billion different religions. Why? Because we are all different from each other. So if we have 30 million spiritists, 100 million spiritists in the world, there would be 100 million spiritisms, because we would be relating to what I want, not to what Spiritism really is. So we need to be very careful. We would be committing, I'm reading again, we would be committing a grave error if we placed all doctrinal responsibility on mediums. No. The Spiritist doctrine, he says further down the paragraph, the Spiritist doctrine, Dr. Fidelis, is a sublime and pure fountain, inaccessible to the individualistic cravings of any one of us, a fountain from which all individuals must drink the water of their own renewal. It's our own renewal. We need to go and drink the water of our own renewal in that pure fountain. We should not be putting all the responsibility, putting the responsibility on the people. No, it's about the message. It's about what's lying underneath the layer, the human layer, or the imperfect human layer that we create upon Spiritism, upon the message of Christianity, the message of love, of forgiveness, of mercy. So if we are still on that level that Dr. Fidelis is, waiting and expecting for people to do their jobs, and we don't do anything, we're unfortunately still committing the same mistake that in this case here Dr. Fidelis is or was. And when we do that is, as Mr. Bente says at the end of this paragraph, when we analyze the world in Spiritism by the mediums, it is as if a researcher who is supposedly starting to study, a biologist, for example, who is supposing to study the plant, the seed, right? Let's say an apple tree, right? And then the seed is the most important thing. And without the seed, there will be no apple tree, right? Without the apple seed, there will be no apple tree. So, but what do? They bend, and then I'm going to read. I'm going to read from the book again. Quote, they bend over the ground, count the grains of sand and invasive worms, determine the degree of heat, and study the longitude. They observe climatic tendencies and note atmospheric variations. But, to the great surprise of sincere workers, they disregard the seed. So, they're supposed to be studying the apple tree. They have to start by the seed. They need to study the other things that he just mentioned here, right? The ground, the grains of sand, the worms. They need to study all that. But then they study all that and completely forget about the seed. It doesn't work, right? We have to study everything. That's the problem with when they don't want to go further, right? They stop at the frauds, and they don't go ahead and look at what the ones who are not fraudulent produced, and what are the consequences of those seeds. What will those seeds grow up to be? Big trees with lots of more seeds of love, of compassion. Dr. Fidelis stopped smiling when he said that and commented, we shall see, we shall see. I'm waiting for a message from my loved ones to provide me with an unmistakable sign of survival after death. When he says that, Aniceto touched Vicente and Andre, but he says, touched us, right? So Aniceto comes to us and says, do you see how contaminated his mind is? You know, he's curious, and probably at that moment he's talking to Andre, which if we remember, last week we talked a little bit about Andre's curiosity because he mentioned it, right? That how much he changed. And that's one of the connections between last chapter and this chapter, right? Is the curiosity, right? And Mr. Bentes looked at us and said, hey, we have to be honest. We don't have to be poking around other people's lives. I have to be honest about what we really want to do, to know, so that we can change ourselves, just the curiosity because of curiosity, right? So he's one of those curious, Aniceto goes on, ill incarnates. He knows a lot. He has a broad education, but his feelings, his sentiments are poisoned. He doesn't have a pure heart. He still doesn't really want to know. And this is what makes his mind be clouded. He is a superficial researcher, as are many people. Remember in No Solar, if you go back, somebody, now I forget who it is, probably Lysias or maybe Clarencio, maybe Minister Genesio, I don't remember, when he says, well, Andre, you want to work here, I would say it's Genesio, Andre, you want to work here, but let me tell you, you were a doctor on the planet, but what would you say if a botanist, right, wanted to study a tree, but the only thing that he studied was the bark of the tree, was the outer layer of the main trunk. He didn't go deep enough to really understand what's in the core of the tree. Didn't even go to the roots to understand what it is. So you look at the outside ring of the main trunk of the tree, and you say, "Oh, I know the whole tree." No, you don't. No, you don't. And that's exactly what Mr. Bentis or Aniceto is telling us here. Look, he's a superficial researcher. He researches only the material part of life, and then he thinks that he knows everything. And then Aniceto here is apparently talking about him. But let's read this part by putting ourselves in his place to see if we are still in the same level as Dr. Fidelis is. And hopefully we will not be. But let's see. He says, Aniceto says, talking about Dr. Fidelis and talking about a lot of other people that are incarnate and discarnate as well. So let's see. I'm going to change the he. I'm going to put one so that we can generalize to see if we can be considered part of this. One is a superficial researcher, as are many people. One expects everything from others. One examines his fellows, but doesn't examine oneself. One wants divine realization without making a human effort. One expects grace for oneself, yet makes demands on others. One wants to reap the wheat of truth without participating in the sowing of truth. One hopes for peace of mind through faith without taking part in constructive work. One values science without consulting one's conscience. One prefers ease without accepting responsibility. And living in the whirlwind of continual social drinking, clinging to lower interests, and the utmost satisfaction of the physical senses, one expects to receive messages from spirits. How are we in this picture that Aniceto paints? Hopefully, we are getting farther and farther away from this. Hopefully, we are taking part in constructive work, and we are getting peace of mind. Hopefully, we are consulting our conscience while valuing science, which is very important for us. Hopefully, we are already accepting responsibility for our mistakes, for our work, and we are finding that it is hard, but it is gratifying. Hopefully, we are receiving messages from spirits, even if we don't hear them directly, even if we don't have a writing message, but we are receiving through our sleep, we are receiving in our inspirations, because we are continually striving to live far away from that social drinking, from clinging to lower interests, and allowing ourselves not to look only for satisfaction of the physical senses, but also looking forward and looking more and more to satisfy the spiritual senses of ourselves. Hopefully, we are participating in a sowing of the good seeds so that we are already reaping the wheat of truth. Hopefully, we are not making a lot of demands on other people, but doing our part and then receiving grace from God. Hopefully, we are already making a lot of human effort so that we can see and feel in ourselves divine realization in our own lives. Hopefully, we are already examining ourselves without judging the others, doing our part and understanding that the other has a mind of his own, that she has a mind of her own, and she is free to do what she wants, and he is free to do what he wants. But I am bound to doing what I need to do the best I can do to really make an effort to be a better person, examining myself without examining the others, and doing my part without expecting everything from other people. Hopefully, that's where we are right now, because, as Aniceto said, there are many of us who are still not there. And by doing this, we will hopefully, at the end, be a better person. I wouldn't say, or shouldn't have said hopefully. We will be better. And if we are still not feeling that well, let's keep going, because we have not reached the end yet. Everybody was amazed when he finalizes this. Vicente was impressed, as we said in the beginning. Vicente was there at all times. And he asks, what does this man want? What does this man want after all? It is as if he is asking us, my friends, what do you want? You are reading this book. You are here searching for the truth. You are here looking for something. What do you want after all? Aniceto looks at us, smiles, and replies, look, you would find that very difficult to answer. For us, Vicente, Dr. Fidelis, and here I should say Mackenzie, is one of those sickly persons who have not yet decided to look for relief because of his excessive attachment to the physical senses. We are all striving not to be excessively attached to the physical senses, looking for something more, for something bigger, for something that fills us all. We need the physical sense. We need materiality. We need our work. God bless that we have a work now, that we have a family, that we have a house, that maybe we have a car, we have a means of transportation, that we have money to eat, to buy food to eat, that we have education, that we have, materially speaking, a lot that we can have to live our lives productively. But let's not be too attached to this. Let's strive. Let's make the big effort to keep going spiritually, to keep learning more, to getting out of our comfort zone, of our material comfort zone, to look to others. And when I say look to others, is not just the others that we don't see every day, but look to our side and see our husband, see our wife, see my daughter, see our son, see the coworker who needs a hug, who needs a shake of hands, who needs just a caring ear. Just don't speak anything, but allow the person to talk to you. Allow the person to see in you, to see in me a good friend, to see in me a person that the other one can count on to grow, to lend a hand when we see someone in need. Let's grow our family. Let's make our family this place where we can learn how to detach excessively from the physical senses, so that we can all be more fulfilled spiritually than when we got here once we reincarnated. So hopefully this is not very difficult for us to answer, as I mentioned before. Hopefully we know exactly what we want after all. Hopefully we all have learned by reading this book, by our continuous spiritual education, that we are indeed spirits living in a material body and not the other way around. And hopefully as well, I will see you again here on Kardec Radio at the Messengers in Our Home next week. It was great having you here. Have a great week, everyone. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to Kardec Radio, broadcasting live every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Email us and share your comments at www.kardec.org. KardecRadio.com. Until next time, we wish you many blessings.